So it's, it's a challenge. And I think that, that's where we see the traditional media really work well, because it's less algorithmically based. So it can really be sort of truly incremental to what you're doing with Facebook or Google.
Welcome everybody to the Out of Home Insider Show, a podcast like no other, hosted by the one and only Tim Rowe.
There's a special out-of-home case study from today's guest in the show notes, so make sure to go there and check that out. This kicks off our media buyers track in the D2C Ecom series. Enjoy.
We call it like a first principles approach, where we think through, everything that a brand that we're working with is doing in marketing holistically, and try and, help them from a quantitative lens determine like where they can do better and stretch their budget further and just improve overall. So some of the things, I'm obviously focused on media buying, but I think as a group, some of the things we push them on or push our clients on are like, not just how are you spending your media budget, but how are you spending your creative budget? Are you kind of optimizing that in a way where you're getting the right assets for all your channels, from website to media and CRM and so on. And then, even like how are you spending your own team's time, right? Like a lot of the brands we work with are fairly early stage and kind of more limited in-house resources, right? So you want to make sure that you're like maximizing those in-house resources in terms of, spending their time on the things that are most likely to drive results. Definitely taking like that pretty intensive and holistic approach to clients is where we've seen the most success. The last piece is it's, we really try and be quantitative. When we're doing that holistic review, we want to have like a data point that we can point to as far as like why we're doing something or not doing something, and that we can track over time to make sure we're moving the needle in the right direction.
Let me ask you a question around that. How do you balance that? You talked about managing spend and the balance between how much money goes to creative and how much goes to the actual media itself, what goes to production, but still being quantitative, data-driven, focused on outcomes and how this impacts the bottom line ultimately. How do you balance that? The alchemy of kind of art and science, as it were, the quantitative and the qualitative aspects of building a campaign. How do you think about those two things?
Yeah, and I think probably take e-commerce as an example because it's a good kind of a good starting point. But I think as I think people say a lot now that kind of creative is the targeting on it's especially true for Facebook and Instagram, and it's definitely the most important variable in your performance and even just targeting as far as like what the media buyer is doing in the Meta backend is just much less important than it was 7 years ago or whatever. So I think that, just making sure that you're making the right and enough investment in creative is really important to driving improved performance. And I think, what we tend to do is a couple types of analysis. Like, one will just like look at a time series data and see, like when we do launch new creative, like what type of improvement are you be able to drive? And I think this is a lot of what I do as a media buyer is I'll put new creative in and I'll, refresh the next day and see like what difference you can understand in CPC or what difference you can see in your CPA. And oftentimes I'll see with the right creative a 20 or 30% boost, which is obviously huge for a business. That's obviously not infinite, right? Like you can't
sure.
just
but if you
introduce
catch
new
lightning
creative
in a bottle, hey, there's an opportunity here. This creative popped. Let's invest more. Let's expand to a new market. Let's parlay. Let's activate on some out of home. Let's do some additional things. If this creative's resonating, obviously that seems like an opportunity, and especially in such a resource restricted environment where we are so cost conscious. How are brands kind of thinking and responding to maybe the current economic state, as it were? How is today different than 3 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a lot of the brands that we see, saw pretty explosive growth during COVID, and it's not as much the case now, especially for e-commerce. So they're thinking about like what they can do to continue growing and continue reaching new customers with ideally less marketing budget, right?
Sure.
And I think what we've really seen brands focus on, and we've tried to focus on, is incrementality. So assessing across the board, like which of your channels is really moving the needle as far as new customers. Because I think you see a lot of, especially within digital, over-attribution, where you can look at a ROAS number, for a retargeting campaign or for a brand search campaign, and it's just pretty high, but it doesn't reflect the underlying reality where those people are likely to convert, regardless of seeing the ad.
What does that mean? Unpack that. Like, why is that the case? Why could that be a false positive?
Yeah. So just, imagine someone does, a search for out-of-home insider, right? And like they've heard about it somewhere else. But if you're looking at, say, visits to your site or whatever, that's going to get credited to Google, the brand search campaign. In reality, it was, however they had heard about it in the first place, whether it's on, you end up over-attributing to the last channel that drove the site visit, or a lot of times we see that's brand search or retargeting on Facebook or another channel.
So, and I'm ultimately kind of cannibalizing what you would have had otherwise, but you're spending against yourself to get it. And that, the math on that can't work really well for too super long,
right.
or really a big monster scale. Obviously, we have to do something to drive said branded search. So thinking about that, maybe where do brands start? Where do most e-commerce brands, the brands that you're working with, where are they starting in their kind of marketing journey? And ultimately, when do they start to experiment with offline media and channel diversification, really thinking about how to allocate to unlock new optimization?
A lot of people will sort of say like Facebook isn't as effective as it was in the past. And I mean, there's some truth to that, but I think for us, the reality is like when you first launch a brand, like, Facebook and also Google are really going to be your bread and butter, and that they're going to be the most effective channels for reaching new customers. And I mean, there's all sorts of reasons for that, but I think a lot of it comes down to, the fact that they reach everyone, right? Like everyone is in those places, and the data that they have on users for who is likely to be in market for your products. So we, if we're launching a brand, working with the brand as they launch, we'll always start in those places. And I think when we see the importance of channel expansion come in, and especially out of home and some of the other traditional channels, is when brands have, become somewhat more established. And I think that's when you start to see some of what I was talking about. I kind of call it over-targeting kick in, where you're established in the market, people know who you are. And so, when you think about the algorithm for a Facebook, like it's going to try and find people who know who you are, because those are the people who are most likely to purchase. So, whereas previously it was, and it's still to a certain extent is finding new customers, but previously it was looking at people's, online behavior and finding the ones who are most likely to be good new customers. Now it's saying, I want to get as many conversions as I can. I'm going to serve to the people who are familiar with the brand.
And that's that over-optimization piece.
Exactly, right. And you can exclude your site visitors, you can exclude previous purchasers, but I think that your match rate is not always going to be great. And you're kind of fighting an uphill battle, because Facebook or Google or whoever is always going to be, the algorithm is always going to be trying to find the people who are familiar with the brand, because they're most likely to convert. So it's it's a challenge. And I think that that's where we see the traditional media really work well, because it's less algorithmically based, so it can really be sort of truly incremental to what you're doing with Facebook or Google. So you're using different tactics that rely more on just like what you know about your audience, where they over-index as far as location, what their demographics are, and you can kind of hit them in that way. Because I think what we often see is that brands will start Facebook and Google, and then they'll expand to like a programmatic display or a Pinterest. And the reality is like the targeting on a programmatic display or a Pinterest is going to be very similar to what it is on a Facebook or a Google. And so you're not, I think, truly like finding a good pool of net new users, and traditional channels tend to do a better job of that.
Interesting. So how then, okay, so we can kind of get hypothetical here. As walled gardens get taller, how does that over-optimization start to play out? It would seem like now I have a series of false positives, and I really don't know how to gauge directionally where am I making money. I'm just spending in all of these places, and sometimes I'm selling stuff, and sometimes I'm selling more, and sometimes maybe I'm selling a little bit less. How do you start to decouple and get back to like more of a holistic approach?
Just a good incrementality test. Like there's not a really great substitute for that. Looking at, I think match market is usually the best. Like just doing a match market test with each of your core channels and seeing how you do in terms of overall sales when you're running on Facebook or you're not running on Facebook, or when you're running on, when you're sending a mail piece or you're not sending a mail piece. I think that's kind of the best and most fundamental place to start. And then I do think there's just like general principles that you can take in your media buying that help you be more incremental. Like doing less retargeting, right? Like trying to maximize your digital spend as much as, you can't be 100% sure, but trying to maximize as much of your digital spend on new customers as you can. And then like, I think having a good mix of traditional and digital is good. And then, like you're saying, trying to limit your digital channels in some cases, like really what's working the best and feel confident in, because I think you do get this effect of your over-attribution is going to be more concerning when you have more platforms, because they can all end up taking credit for the same order. If you're hitting someone with a retargeting ad on Facebook on display, and then they're doing a brand search and coming in through Google, it's like now you have 3 conversions that you reported. Maybe none of them were the reason that the person was converting. Limit your channels to the ones that you can really feel confident are incremental.
Something you mentioned there, the match market test. Can you explain what that is and maybe give us an example of how that works or how to do that?
Basically, just if you have a media mix, selecting a couple markets that are similar in a lot of ways. So you can be similar in terms of population and demographics and purchasing behavior for your brand. And then basically saying in one market, I'm going to take approach A. So it might be pausing your Facebook spend, and in another market, you take approach B. You keep your Facebook spend on, and then you do that for a period of 4 to 6 weeks, and then you basically compare the 4 to 6 week period to the 4 to 6 week period before in both hits, and say what was that delta in for approach A versus approach, and then that delta is your true incremental revenue from, and that's you put that over, and that's your true ROAS, and often it's different than what the platform reports, I imagine.
As one would imagine, and a theme that I've heard you mention a couple times, Chris, is the idea of incrementality. When you're looking for incrementality, how do you know that you're at a point where I've maxed out or I'm close to maxing out and I need to start looking for that next channel or the next thing? How do you identify that as a brand, as a founder? How do you know?
It's just generally a sense of kind of increasing your media spend, and you're not getting a lot more coming back in terms of revenue. I think the other way we probably look at it is on like what's your needed CAC in order to break even, right? So if you're making this much margin on your product, interpolate that you need to drive a certain CAC in order for it to be profitable. And so I think often when we start looking at other channels is when you get your core channel spend to the point where it's no longer profitable when you look at your product margin in your CAC.
Fascinating. Maybe land us home here on kind of where we started with the percentage of our budget. We talked about media versus creative and kind of being able to identify these inflection points in the next moment and where to look. We talked a little bit about in the lead up the use of media money to nurture the customer lifecycle and how that's not really a good use of obviously the money that you've got, and how there might be other ways to more effectively communicate with a customer once you've won them, and how to think about that. I think that was the really aha moment for me, was how to think about the money that you're spending and how you communicate with the customer you've already won. Explain that to us.
Yeah, so a couple of key points. Like one is just similar to the incrementality point, which is that if you're looking at someone who's already purchased, your reported ROAS is going to be much higher than your actual or incremental ROAS, because that person is already likely to buy again, and they're getting a lot of emails from you, and there's a pretty good chance they bought because of an email they got rather than an ad that they got. So that's one point. We feel like it's just better for brands to be focusing more of their marketing on net new customers, because once you have converted, like just so much of interaction is going to be through email, and that's how you are often going to interpret what's going on with the brand. So I think like making sure that your email and SMS programs are in a really good spot and your website is in a really good spot, to me are the best ways to maximize like your lifetime value and your customer retention. And then not to say that there's no room for media spend on existing customers, but I think kind of the status quo is too high, right? Like most brands spend too much on it. The other thing, I think you often see marketers or brands think that there's a need to have like really, really tailored creative for your existing customers and have that be different than what you're doing for acquisition. And I think that's just not what we see in the data. I think especially with your paid social platforms, people are scrolling through a feed and they're responding to each individual post like as a post on its own. And I think that just is often, it's a similar response, like whether you've seen the brand or not, and like the type of content that is engaging to someone who's a prospect is also tends to be engaging to someone who is familiar with the brand. So I think time and resources spent, I think there's often too much time put into, a really detailed funnel approach where you're doing different things with your media creative throughout the funnel, when what you really want to do is spend the most time distilling your product and your brand in a way that is like universal and communicates well to people in general. Brands often read more into like the difference between acquisition and retargeting in that way than there really is.
Spitting some truth, Chris Rigas. Thank you for dropping that bomb. A question for you: Black Friday, Cyber Monday. You work with a lot of e-commerce brands. What are like the top 3 mistakes you see from e-commerce brands in the Black Friday, Cyber Monday season?
One that we see is brands not being clear in their messaging around what the sale is, or trying to, I don't know if I'd say trick, but kind of
be a little bit cheeky, tease what it is we're actually up to, be intriguing.
Right. And then I think what you often get is you get people who purchase and then feel like, that the discount went up, and so they didn't get the best offer. And I think that's not the dynamic that you want to encourage, because that person is obviously going to be less likely to come back and doesn't feel like they had a good experience with the brand. Where we see success is where brands are more transparent, and we've even seen like a lot of digital brands have a lot of inventory at this point, given some of the overall sales trends the last couple of years. So I think we've seen where brands are just honest about that and say, we bought a lot of inventory, we've got some really great sales. Like, people will latch onto that and
they appreciate that. Yeah, like that's relatable. Like, all right, cool. Yeah, you screwed up at your job. I've made a bonehead move here or there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. If I could get a 2-for-1 with free shipping, I'll take it.
Right. 100%.
How about missed opportunities? What things do you think there are that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we didn't do this, or I can't believe they didn't do that? What things do you think are just like obvious missed opportunities?
So one, maybe I'll shout out a brand that we're working with, because I think they do a nice job of this. So Dig's Pet company, their hero products are the Rebel and Evolve dog crates, which are really nice and advanced as far as features dog crates. But so one thing that they've done is their organic social lead, every time they run a sale, like, will do, it's kind of like a meme video where I think the most recent one is like Mariah Carey, like, over a static image of the crate. And so it's basically like something you post to TikTok, right?
Sure.
And it just does really well, like, even if you look at Facebook and Instagram, because that's the type of content people are interested in. Doing more UGC around sales that just like talks about the sale and announces it is, I think, something that brands could do more of.
We talked about over optimization from like an algorithmic standpoint, but also an over optimization sometimes from like a content standpoint. And hey, maybe just be consumers, like, make the things that like regular people want to watch, because it's entertaining, because it's funny seeing this little gif dancing above the crate. And I get it, you sell crates, but like, you're funny too, and I think that's relatable. And I own a dog, and my dog's funny, and right, like, now I've created this story, this dialogue from what would otherwise just be your ad. And I think that's kind of the superpower that we love out of home so much for. It's a very visceral connection that it creates, and using things like that, tap into the zeitgeist, and think about how that looks on your brand. I think that's kind of a fun exercise in itself. Is just like, what could it look like if our brand was a little bit more fun, a little bit more relatable?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something similar with out of home and the paid social, where you're really just asking people to take a second look, do a search and like look up the brand, or for Facebook, like, give a click and look a little bit more into it. And it's really trying to appeal to some more universal things about what people think are funny or engaging, or what catches people's eyes, than like really being as in the weeds with your brand and your story. Not gimmicky things, but things that the people just engage with well.
Chris, maybe just to close this out, give us a peek inside the day in the life of a media buyer. What is it that you're thinking about when you're ultimately not just including out of home in a plan, but like the literal, like, pulling levers, working with partners? What are the things that you look for? Is it speed to market? Is it a partner who's easy to work with? Is it the best pricing? Like, what things make your life easier and put someone forward in the conversation of consideration for you in your planning and buying process?
I think obviously speed to market and responsiveness is important and helpful. I think we try, I probably try and like not weight those like overly heavily, and think about like just, what do I think is the best inventory, and like, the best placement that's going to drive results. And maybe one thing is like creative is just such an important variable. So I think to the extent that when I've worked with out-of-home partners, or even TV partners or direct mail partners who will give a lot of input, obviously I have a sense for what's going to work, but I think it's helpful to get the expert's view. So if I work with someone who has like a really good grip on like what type of creative should be going in, and isn't afraid to like give that input, I think that's really valuable and maybe sets people apart.
That's awesome. That's great feedback. Chris, you've shared so much with us today. Thank you for that. Where can folks connect with you, learn more about Markacy? Give us kind of the Latin long. Where should we go next?
Yeah, can go to markacy.com, I guess, and check us out there. Definitely connect with any of us on LinkedIn. We have a pretty good presence there and post a lot.
Cool. And we've got a great out-of-home case study that we're going to make available. If you've listened to the episode, I'll probably go back and I'll definitely add it in the open, that there's an awesome out-of-home case study that comes along with this episode. You can download it from the website. So make sure to check the show notes. We'll link to all of that stuff below. Chris, thank you so much again for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. This was a great time.
Absolutely. We'll have to do it again sometime. If you found this episode to be helpful, please share it with someone who could benefit. As always, make sure to smash that subscribe button, and we'll see you all next time.
But did you try? It might take a lifetime to know just who you are.
Quarter century, I finally came to my senses. I finally got my hand up on the tinted Benz, kid. I see the world clear through my tinted lenses. With the dream and the drive, the possibilities endless. Now print that, send this all the way to Tokyo. Take a trip down south, down to Mexico. Next stop, Shanghai, the world-class trade show. First class all the way, cause that's how we roll. Yeah, call us the rock star businessman. Rockin' shows, we handle business, man. We got our own future in the palm of our hands, cause divided we fall and together we stand.